Chapter 16, First Lesson. Needless to say, Bats was ridiculously relieved to see that Ori was awake. He'd begun to suspect the Nanites had done something to his brain after a day of no response. Ori offered the report the Nanites had given him, sending it to Bat's laptop via this interface. That, combined with the information he'd collected in the rip-off Ripperdoc lab, gave him a lot to work with. With all that on his plate, Bats set up a couple more 4 nutrition bags and left Ori to rest. The Nanites apparently used what was left of his fat reserves to heal him as quickly as they did. It was possible it would have starved to death without Bats setting those up. Yo, I've made my decision. I'll become a merc.
Oi.
Are you sure? This ain't something to rush. Judy. Yeah. So got a fixers for me to call?
Oi.
Not yet, and he'll be the one to call XD. DW. I got you. Just sit and wait on my word. Judy. KK. Just don't hand me to the mob or anything. Or scavs. Ori. The people you're gonna have to deal with, you are gonna wish they were scavs. Judy. Yeah, he hoped she was just joking about that. Who was worse than the mob or scavs anyway? Ori lays back with a sigh and looks over the report the Nanites had sent him again, trying to understand it. It was literally about his body after all. After 30 minutes of little to no progress, he decides to ask a question that had been niggling at his mind ever since he'd made contact with the bots. Collective, a few days again, when you locked down the use of my arms and legs. What was the purpose of it? Self-preservation, malfunction of host heart, rapid unnatural pulsation due to intravenous introduced foreign substance risking system failure. System reset required. He crooks a brow at that. Wait, so it wasn't because of the danger I was in? He questions. From what the bots were saying, it sounded like that stim Bats had given him was the actual thing that caused the bots to freeze him. That meant it wasn't the bots' fault. Not completely anyway. It was his, and he couldn't blame it on anyone else, only himself. Sensory information unavailable at the time. Then, what about when I tried to smoke? He asks after taking a moment to compose his thoughts and emotions. Access to temporal lobe indicated potential danger and damage to host. He scratches the side of his head. So wait, I thought what I was doing was bad, which was translated from my brain, which you interpreted? Correct. This was getting far too confusing for him. Collective request information detailing system of host. Flesh administrator. What? Detailed illustration of system specifications required to make beneficial modifications. What modifications? He warily questions. Illustration required to specify. All right, I guess.
Yo, Bats.
Send me the body scan, could you? Why? The Ripperdoc asks from the other room. I'll tell you later. Just send it. Ori shouts back. Nanites, can you access the net? He inquires. Negative. System parameters forbid any access. Well, that's a relief. The last thing the net needed was another rogue AI, especially not one that was currently in possession of his body. He plugs his wrist port into the laptop and searches up any books on human biology and physiology. If he was going to make full use of these bots, then they both needed to know exactly what they were doing. If they could really modify his body at the micro level, then he could think of some upgrades that could be done this minute. His muscles, for instance, regular folks would have to exercise to see any progress at all, but for him? Couldn't the bots just tear apart his muscle fibers and repair them again to simulate exercise? Additionally, the progress he could make was not limited to the time he had, merely the resources they'd have access to. They'd already shown the ability to heal wounds that would be fatal to anyone else. The best thing about it was, there wasn't any risk of him going cyber psycho, since everything involved, aside from the Nanites, was literally part of his body. All organic. He eyes the 4 nutrition bags on either side of his bed. He'd probably need a ton more of them if he wanted to go ahead with that plan. He wasn't sure how much energy, protein, or whatever else was required to get years' worth of exercise in a fraction of the time, but it definitely couldn't be light. Ori crooks a brow at the notification appearing on his laptop screen. 100 eddies for each book? What a ripoff! He hadn't expected these books to be so expensive. Maybe it was to stop the rise of street Ripperdocs? Speaking of which, Bats, got any books on human anatomy or anything related to it? I gave you the scan without asking, but you gotta tell me what you're up to if you want anything else, kid. The bots, they want to upgrade some parts, need to make sure they don't turn me into a wolf because they're more efficient, or some shit. He states, inwardly frowning as that thought didn't seem too unlikely given the bots' lack of familiarity with common sense. Aight, Sint, just let me know before you start touching shit. Collective, you get that? He asks as he downloads the sent files. Collective systems missing programs relating to human physiology. Human brain systems identified, structures confirmed. Permission to enact protocol SCTR, 2415. Flesh Administrator. Explain. SCTR, 2415. To assume control and follow directive error missing. Request retracted. Flesh Administrator. Sounds like it's a good thing it's missing, he mutters in thought. I have some requests to make of my own, collective. Awaiting request. Flesh Administrator. Would it be possible to strengthen the system's muscle fibers? With the goal of self-preservation, this would be the first thing to do, he states. Request received. Determining viability. Request unviable at this time. Circulatory system inefficient and required modification before request can proceed. Cardiovascular systems require modification to proceed. Endocrine systems require alterations to proceed. Skeletal structure required alterations to support requested modifications. The nanites go on to list what wouldn't be far from a dictionary's worth of other things that required alterations before his muscle fibers could be touched. Most of it went straight over his head, but with some help from the downloaded books on human anatomy, he roughly understood what needed to be done. Basically, the base systems that support his muscles needed to be enhanced before anything else. If his heart, lungs, and everything else couldn't support the new load his enhanced muscles required, he'd almost immediately have partial or complete organ failure. He also lacked the required nutrients, fats, and minerals such extensive modifications would use. Any upgrades at all would exhaust his body, so he'd need to take it slow regardless of how quickly the nanites could work. There was also another thing he was concerned with. He was still growing, so if he started the upgrades now, he'd probably be stuck at 5.11 feet for who knows how long. Was it worth it? Yes. The enhancements he'd need to save Cat was worth the stagnation of his height. Besides, wouldn't the nanites eventually be able to make him taller? They'd only had information concerning the human anatomy for a short time, and they were probably already better than any other doctor. Chapter 17. Fixer Needs Fixing. Ori nervously rubs his wrists as he sits in one of the small booths of the dingy burger joint. Judy had contacted a local fixer and gotten him what was essentially a job interview for the underworld. He wasn't sure what to expect, but Judy had warned him to stay on his toes as anything and everything could go wrong, even during his first meeting. What's worse is all he had was the shitty budget armed Slotomatic, a gun that was definitely not designed for intentional live combat, merely self-defense against common thugs. Not that he was confident in hitting his shots in the first place, he only hoped the fixer wouldn't notice or care about his suboptimal equipment. The only other weapon he had was the knife on his belt that he'd acquired from his apartment's kitchen. He catches his reflection in a small grime-covered mirror on the wall, drawing his attention to his now slightly pudgy cheeks. It had only been a day since he'd texted Judy, yet he'd put on around 10 kilograms of weight in that time. Liberal use of nutrition and heaps of high-calorie and fat foods like cake and ice cream had allowed him to bulk up in preparation for the nanites to get to work, not to mention extra resources in case he took similar damage to last time. His stomach acid had been temporarily enhanced by the nanites, reducing its efficiency while allowing him to stuff his face almost constantly. Needless to say, Bats had been less than impressed by the substantial food cost. Ring. The joint's door chime draws his eyes, allowing him to spot the arriving man. He matched Judy's description to A.T., dirty well-worn corpo suit, smooth black hair that had been doused in hair gel, a thin, pimple-speckled face with large glasses covering his eyes, the left lens of which occasionally lit up with holographic information. He walked with a confident stride, if you could call it that. To Ori it looked like a cowboy with barbed wire wrapped around his testicles. His thin physique didn't seem all that intimidating either. The fixer pauses and looks around the place before spotting Ori and walking over, dropping into the chair opposite him. "What up? An acquaintance of mine hit me up, said you need work?" "Yeah." His face brightens, his hand extended for a handshake. "Well, call me Spectrum, soon-to-be best fixer of BIGNC. "Are you sure you're the person I'm supposed to see?" Ori questions. Who the fuck calls themselves Spectrum anyway? Besides, what kind of fixer couldn't afford a proper suit? Spectrum quickly nods. "Definitely." "What, you don't like my name?" He grins and taps his glasses. Spectacles, Spectrum, and Chum, a calculated and cool name. "Judy, what the fuck is wrong with this guy?" Ori hurriedly sends a mental text to the person responsible for this situation, all while staying where he was with a neutral expression fixed on his face. "I told you, Ori, some of these dudes are comp duds. Just take the job he's got. This was the only guy who would take noobs. 0, 0, 0, 0, Judy. Prepare yourself. There will be hell to pay for this."
Oi. Hive Foon __ 2 _ Judy.
Spec snaps his fingers in front of Ori's now twitching face. "Hey, you still there? You didn't short-circ, did ya?" Ori blinks and shakes his head and lets out a sigh. "Just tell me the job." I can't. Not yet. We're still waiting on the others." Spec states. "Others?" Ori parrots. He'd thought this was a solo gig. The fixer nods. "Yeah, no offense, but I'd rather keep my clients alive. Risking it all on one newbie merc doesn't tend to work out." "Trust me," he says with a sheepish expression. Ori shuffles uncomfortably as they wait, the fixer occasionally locking eyes with him as if they were on a date gone bad. Thankfully, though, the other solos had arrived. One short guy at 5.6 feet, wearing a muscle vest that visibly showed his large tattooed pecs and arms. On his back was a heavy-looking LMG that swayed precariously from its strap. He had military-cut hair, a thick beard, and a scarred face. Probably a war vet if Ori had to guess. The other was a regular-looking guy wearing heavy body armor that covered almost everything, except his mouth, which was left open via the face guard of his helmet. At his sides were two large revolvers that could probably punch holes through steel like nobody's business. "You." Specs greets. "Maxie," he says, snatching the vet's hand and shaking it for a moment before the man forcefully retrieves his hand with a light slap. Shrugging at the hostile action, the fixer looks to the armored guy and reaches for his hand too. Sorry, what's your name again?" "Six." The man responds with barely a whisper. 6E high K. Specs squeaks when he feels the man's revolver push against his chin, snapping his mouth closed with an audible pop. "Touch me and I fire, till it clicks. Get it?"
Y.
Specs cautiously steps back before shaking his head and recovering his grin, gesticulating towards the booth Ori was sitting in. "Take a seat. This job's a bit more complicated than the usual." The two men awkwardly shuffle in, the booth not quite big enough for everyone, especially with 6 body armor. "Wait." Max interjects before Specs could start. He gestures his head at Ori with his lips thinning. "What's with the kid? Forget daycare or something?" Specs awkwardly chuckles. "Ah nah, this is a newbie an acquaintance recommended to me. Don't worry about it. This job needs 3 guys anyhow," he states, and the trio just stare at him to continue. Specs retrieves a stack of papers from a briefcase he'd been carrying and tries to lay them out on the table, only to flub the transfer and accidentally scatter them, some falling to the floor and into some uncleaned soda. Max and Six just sigh at this and help pick them up, as if this was a regular occurrence with Specs. "Hey, you think we could order some food, swell? I haven't eaten since yesterday," Specs adds, only irritating everyone further. Chapter 18. Planning Stage. "All right, a light," Specs says after gathering everything back up. "Here's the job. A client that has decided to remain unnamed wants some folks dead." He jabs a finger at the trio. "You guys'll do the deed. The client has already provided all the information we need, along with the preparations beforehand." Specs slides some photos in front of them, each with different angles of some parking lot. It was attached to an abandoned auto shop that was completely barricaded up, from the windows to the doors. The garage doors even seemed to be welded shut, preventing anyone from accessing the place without making a noisy entrance. "Carlson's parking lot, 3 ways in and out. Each of you will take 1 point, guard it, and prevent anyone from leaving. Client wants every single one dead. If a single one escapes, we're out of luck and Eds. Got it?" "Who are we hitting?" Max questions as he leans back against his chair, not taking notice of how uncomfortably close he was to Ori. Spec shrugs. "Dunno. Client just wants them zeroed for whatever reason. Says they're always at the lot around 8 in the afternoon. I'm hoping to get this done today, so you've got a couple hours to set up." Ori quirks a brow at him. "So you want us to go kill a bunch of random people we have no information at all about? What if it's the Tigers or Valentinos? You gonna pay us extra for the trouble and the enemies we'll make?" he sharply questions. Max nods with folded arms. "Kid's right. How's the payout?" Spec scratches just his hairline. 50-50. "I got half and you guys split the rest. As for the gang stuff, I highly doubt any are involved." 50-50? Six quietly growls. "Fuckvy, you done to deserve a whole half? No research, no netrunners, no nothing. 70-30 or I ain't doing shit." Max gives his counteroffer. Alright, I guess." Specs relents. "Just get the job done or we're all getting buttons," he says and begins packing up his stuff. Before he leaves the trio alone, he slides some gonk-looking business cards in front of them with his debts on him. "What an idiot." Max shakes his head while squeezing his temples. "We'll use my ride. Enough seats for everyone?" he says while getting to his feet, Six mirroring him. Ori follows but speaks up as they reach the door. "Shouldn't we be making a plan or something?" Max shrugs. "We'll talk about it when we get to the lot. See what we're working with. Can't trust that dumb bastard for good intel." They step outside but Ori's dumbfounded when they reach Max's car. A Mahir Supron FS3, one of the cheapest, shittiest MPV minivans that was currently available, made of the cheapest materials and had an engine that could barely support the car's weight. Ori knew this because it was one of the only vehicles the Quadranos used to use, back when they weren't confined to the tunnels. "This really your ride? Needed cash quick. Had to sell my pride and joy. I know it's scop shit, but at least we won't have to worry about it taking bullets. Replacing its parts is easier than swapping shoes," Max explains as he slides into the driver's seat. Six riding shotgun. Ori reluctantly sits in the back, feeling like he was a child's safety seat away from a school tour or something. Max fires up the engine and begins driving towards the job destination, occasionally catching Ori's eyes through the driver's mirror. "So, what's a punk kid like you doing on a job like this?" the vet inquires conversationally. Needed cash quick. Ori throws the man's words back at him. Sounds like every 2-bit merc I've ever heard of. Just remember that the eddies mean fuck all if you're 6 feet under. It takes around 20 minutes to finally reach the lot, and Ori wasn't all that impressed by it. The photos they'd been shown were clearly out of date as the wire fencing now had small holes cut through them, indicating someone with spare bolt cutters wanted a closer look at the auto shop. The lot itself was almost completely empty, aside from some completely stripped clean cars that were missing doors, tires, and anything else you could pawn off. The only thing of interest he really saw was the large congregation of trash in the center of the place, along with a circular spot that was blackened with ash, likely used commonly for a campfire or some sort. Adrenal systems increased. Request explanation. Flesh administrator. Just preparing for combat, he mentally states, hoping the bots could pick up on it. No present threat. Acute stress response irregularity. Request explanation. Flesh administrator. No threat yet. Soon there will be. Collective request leave vicinity. Flesh administrator. Combat necessary for further survival. He simply responds in a way the bots would understand. Understood. Collective request permission to assist autonomic nervous systems. Information processes dash. Granted, just don't act against me, he mentally states, feeling his heart rate forcefully slow and calm him down. His nerves were definitely getting to him. The last time he'd been in a serious fight was when some addicts in Ksenia tried to rob him. Most ran away when he flashed his gun, but a single, clearly cracked-out man stayed. Ori had loaded him full of bullets, but he kept on coming, forcing him to beat him to death with his bare hands. That had fucked him up for days, or maybe weeks afterwards, and it took the combined efforts of his dad and sister to bring him back to his senses. He could still feel it now, the man's warm lifeblood splattering and sticking to his face as he drove his fist into his mutilated face. The man's manic look only faded moments before his heart finally gave out, the look of shock and panic remaining on his face even after death. Thump. Max backhands Ori's shoulder. Stay awake, kid. Time to plan shit out. Chapter 19. Entry Shootout. So, how are we gonna do this? Ori asks, following Max and Six as they survey the area. Think the fixer's plan'll do, Max starts, jabbing 2 fingers at the 3 entrances into the lot. The wire fencing weaved between structures like concrete walls, which would potentially give cover when the shootout starts. Only problem is, can you hold your own? The vet pointedly asks Ori. I'll have to, won't I? It's either that or dying. Ori retorts. He tries to place a hand on his gun, but realizes that it isn't there. His head sharply turns, and he spots Six looking his slot-o-matic over, his mouth twisting into a scowl. This? Kid, you'd probably be better off with your bare hands than that thing. Disposable piece of trash that ain't worth the material it's made out of. I know that. I was planning on klepping a gun when the fight starts. Targets'll probably have something worth using. Ori explains, catching the weapon as Six tosses it over. Max shrugs. Whatever. Looks to me that we'll have to cover for you. He pauses in thought before shoving 2 cylindrical objects into Ori's hands, which he almost fumbles and drops when he realizes what there were. Fragmentation grenades. Shit he'd only seen his dad use once, not to mention the thing that ended up killing him. Ori swallows the bile, threatening to bubble up, and tentatively holds the grenades, looking back up to Max. What are these for? If you're asking me to play kamikaze, I'ma have to refuse. You're gonna use them to push the targets away from your exit. No way you'll be able to hold anyone off with that rinky-dink piece of shit you got there, but a couple grenades should send him our way instead. Max gestures to Six, who just gives a small nod. You sure? This ain't for you. Anyone gets past you, then none of us are getting paid. Shut up, do your job, and we'll see this through. Understand? Max asks, and Ori sharply nods. Good. Then let's go over everything one last time and get the comms set up. Hours pass, and just when Ori suspected Spec's information to be off, the sound of rumbling engines and loud Latin hip-hop blaring on loud subwoofer stereos. Ori ducks behind cover and activates his Scav holomask as he spots the targets drift around a nearby corner, swerving randomly in the street before making another sharp turn into the lot. The rear of the front car clips the gate, but the driver either doesn't notice or doesn't care about the long scratches left in the paint. 3 cars follows, each halting to a stop in the middle of the lot around the remnants of the campfire Ori spotted earlier. A number of people step out, none with any identifiable gang tats, clothes, or symbols that Ori recognized, meaning they were probably a new gang, or just a group of thugs. They were boisterous, drunk, some clearly on drugs and fondling heavily modded women who all but threw themselves against the men. A couple had the wherewithal to do a check of the surroundings with guns in hand, but it was shallow, not anything to be concerned over for Ori or his temporary teammates. Targets are here. Should we go? Ori silently questions via the linked comm. Not yet. Let them get some drinks in him. If only to savor their last moments, Max's voice orders. Ori sits there for another 10 minutes, stock still and tightly gripping his weapon. Were it not for the bots manually maintaining things, He'd have already been exhausted simply from rapid heartbeats and adrenaline. Finally, though, it seems it was almost time. All of the targets had gotten comfortable and started drinking with one another. One had stepped away to roll over a SUT-blackened metal barrel and placed it where Ori had thought a campfire had been placed. Unfortunately for them, just before the man can place it fully, Max triggers the grenades hidden in the ash. Boom. Almost all of the targets are knocked clear off of their feet, the sudden attack and their inebriation combining to drastically disorient them all. The metal fragments from the grenade ended up killing 2 or 3 of them instantly, while many more were injured. Their initial 12 or so people had been reduced to 10, the remains scrambling to grab their weapons and firing randomly around them, with no real idea of where their enemy was. Max pokes his head over some cover and drops his LMG on a concrete block to stabilize it, instantly opening fire on the group who throw themselves behind their vehicles for cover. Asterisk, daga gaga 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 gaga. Asterisk. Spares, paint, and dust fly as the bullets drill holes into the doors and chassis of the cars, blasting out windows and shredding the tires. A few bullets had even found weak points in the cars and managed to go all the way through, kicking up dirt around the now freaking out thugs. Adrenal systems activated. Digestion and other non-essential systems resources temporarily reallocated. At the Nanite's warning, Ori feels a pulse of energy go through him, his breathing picking up as he pushes himself to act. He leans out of cover and lets off a bullet spray of his own, limiting the burst to 3 or 4 to conserve ammunition. His weapon couldn't be reloaded after all. Who are you? The FUCK-DY want? One man shouts as his buddy tries to start up the car nearest to Ori. He responds by pulling the pin on a grenade and lobbing it. It doesn't reach where he was aiming, but it rolls to a stop just underneath the vehicle, unbeknownst to the unfortunate man still inside it.
Asterisk boom, asterisk.
Another explosion rings out, almost flipping the car and utterly decimating the man inside it. Ori could see the man's body all but pop like a balloon through the door window, obscuring everything in the front seats from the surprising amount of blood. Collective request permission to assist frontal lobe and temporal lobe stress response. Flesh administrator. The bots inform as Ori's breath hitches at the horrific sight. Do it, he quickly whispers, feeling a cool sensation wash over him, emotion draining away and allowing him a logical glimpse into the situation. Wait, the nanites just altered his brain chemistry.
Bang!
A bullet cracks a piece of concrete off of the cover he was using, causing him to drop back to avoid dying. His caution over the bot's unnatural familiarity with how his brain works could be sorted out later, when he wasn't at risk of having his skull vacated of gray matter. Chapter 20. Simmering. The targets were now on total defense, unloading their respective weapons towards where Max and Ori were. Only 2 of their vehicles were still operable, but they probably assumed they'd be gunned down and destroyed if they tried to access them. One man throws himself to the ground next to one of his friend's corpses, grabbing a high-tech-looking rifle that visibly glows when he holds it, the front sparking and crackling. "Take this, you fucks," he roars, standing and firing up at the sky. Ori thought the guy had just gone crazy until Max's voice shouted over the comms. "Smart gun. Get down." The bullets fly high in the air before unleashing miniature explosions, their backs opening up to reveal small thrusters that allow them to turn in midair and fire down at Max's position from above. He's forced to ditch his LMG and retreat, but the thug just turns towards Ori and does the same. Ori throws himself to the side, but the bullets twist over the concrete wall and come down on him. Without thinking, he brings his arm up, allowing them to strike that instead of his face. Thankfully, the bullets traded stopping power for mid-air control, preventing them from going straight through his hastily raised defense and into his head. "Arg. Fuck," he exclaims as his arm goes limp, for bullets now lodged in the limb. Pain process is lowered, the bots report, dulling the intense, throbbing sensation. "Kid, you still alive?" Max exclaims over the comms. "Yeah, took some shots though." "Well then get to work. 6 go." Ori pokes his head over the cover, just in time to see 6 in action. His body appears seemingly out of nowhere as he plunges a dagger into the neck of a thug, his revolver in his other hand unloading into another. A thug quickly turns and sprays his machine gun into 6's chest, but he just stands there and takes it on his body armor before dropping the guy with a bullet to the brain. His body then vanishes again, camouflage cyberware activating and causing the last 3 remaining men to all but shit themselves. They all make a break for it, throwing themselves into one of the cars as Max fires at it. 6 reappears in front of it and starts firing through the front windscreen, but is forced to dive out of the way as a man slams his foot on the accelerator. "Kid. On it," Ori responds, pulling out the grenade with his teeth and throwing it into the car via the shattered windscreen. The men scream in panic, but aren't quick enough to jump out as it explodes, instantly killing all 3 of them. The car continues, slamming into a nearby lamppost before bursting into flames. He thought that was the end, but his eyes widen when the rear door opens and reveals a gruesome sight. A teenage girl that must have been sleeping in the car the entire time flops out of the vehicle and begins crawling towards him. Her legs were bent at odd angles and most of her body had been burnt. Even her pleas for help sounded awful as her vocal cords were also heavily damaged. Numbly, he raises his gun and fires a couple shots into her head, emotionlessly dropping the empty weapon afterwards. Ori stares at the mess for a moment before shaking his head and recovering his composure, quickly wrapping some bandages around his wounded arm. That all of them? He quietly asks. Should be. I'll do one last sweep to confirm.
Max responds.
A minute later and it was confirmed. The targets were all dead. Returning system functions. Ori's cheeks abruptly bloat as everything hits him at once, retching and vomiting all over the floor as the combined pain, nerves, and emotional turmoil return. He'd killed before, but killing multiple people at one time, some in the same manner as his dad? It was too much for him. Uff. He grimaces, wiping his mouth and spitting out the last of his breakfast/stomach acid. He makes his way over to the massacred campsite at the center of the lot, Max already sifting through the remnants for anything good. You all right? Look like you've seen a ghost. Blood loss? He questions as he spots Ori's pale face, turning his attention to the bloody bandages around his left arm. Ori shakes his head. No, not used to this sort of thing. Max shrugs. I was the same my first time. Had no idea what I was doing when I enlisted. Fucking Corpo War. He loses himself in thought for a moment before looking back at Ori, tossing a submachine gun at him. Here, newbie friendly. Ori almost fumbles as he catches it and twists it in his hand as he looks it over. What is it? Militech M221 Saratoga, 30 rounds of 9mm, enough stop-in power to get the job done. Outside of them chrome heads. Small enough that the NCPD won't be a skin questions on why you're lugging it around, like this thing. He gestures to his LMG. Click. He takes out the magazine and puts it back in, to get better hand on the mechanism, nodding to himself at the weight in his hands. Thanks, hey dash. His body automatically moves and forces the suddenly appearing revolver at his stomach to the side. 6 other gun was already resting against his forehead, however, leaving him no room to move. 6. Put that fucking gun down. I get what you're thinking, but it ain't worth shooting the kid.
Max angrily exclaims.
70 split between 2 sounds better. 6 retorts, pulling the hammer back on the revolver with an audible click. It'll be split between 1 if you do this, 'cause I ain't leaving you standing if you pull the trigger.
Max growls.
6 huffs and retrieves his weapons. You're going soft. Max shakes his head. Nah, you're just going psycho. You woulda never considered doing that before. Lay off the mods. Ori wets his dry lips as 6 begins searching the crashed vehicle for anything of interest. What was that about? He questions Max. The vet sighs. You're better not a skin that if you want to keep your head. Mercs like to chrome up to give themselves an advantage. Problem comes when they do too much, or too much at once. That's the reason why most cyberpsychos are former mercs. His eyes widen. He's going cyberpsycho? He asks, knowing just how big a deal that was. Most cyberpsychos were chromed out of their minds, making them harder to take down than a tank. Fast, strong, durable, with strange abilities, intelligence with no logic, and no ability to feel pain. It was a nightmare scenario. Not yet, but he will if he keeps this shit up, he shouts loud enough for 6 to hear. That body armor you see? Ain't body armor. He utters forebodingly.